Good morning, everybody. Something I noticed this morning was Lyd said her car stank of chili con carne, and then someone came rushing in with chili powder and handed it to Lids, and I presumed it was because she's made a chili but didn't have chili powder. And it reminded me of being in the pubs. I used to be a publican, and when you're a publican, you learn something really quickly, which is never trust a chef, because if a chef doesn't turn up, you're stuffed. You have a menu in a restaurant full of hungry people and nobody to cook it. And so I learned very quickly to be able to cook anything that was on the menu. And on some of the mornings, you would go in and you would make up like the chili or the curry for the day, for the jacket potatoes, for the rice, or for whatever it was going with. And you would put up a massive vat of this stuff and you would cook it and you would stir it and you would try it. And it was like, oh man, it's pretty average that. And it was at times like that when you would go into the big walking fridge, put on your gloves and get out the hottest chili that you could find, put it on its own chopping board because it would stain everything else, chop the tiniest bit off and crumble it into the chili. And then suddenly what was average and bland had become full of flavor and full of excitement and tasted delicious. The tiniest chili pepper transformed the vat. And as I begin, may I remind each one of you that you are chili peppers. But each one of you, every single one of you, is called to transform the areas that you live in. And you can do it because you are chili peppers. God isn't just calling the Baptist minister, the vicar, the bishops anymore. He's calling everybody to live in such a way that new people come to faith and new churches are started. And if you're sat there saying, yeah, that's right, but not me, then you're probably the one who's going to do it through. Because it's the odd ones, the ugly ducklings, as I heard recently. It's the broken. It's the ones that aren't clever. It's the ones that are struggling, and it's the ones that don't have a clue what they're doing. And God takes them and He uses them and He transforms the world with them. So may you know that you can be chili peppers. And here's a way that we can be. And I want to talk this morning about the two types of prayer that are going to help each one of us be chili peppers in our communities. Are you up for that? That's good news. Really good news. So I've failed in most of the things I've done. But I like failing because I don't know about you, but I learn more when I fail than if I'm successful. So actually, I probably learned more about God in those wilderness years that Mr. Leach talked about than I ever did at Bible college. And in fact, I think my greatest gift is that people see the publican and not a minister. And that's much more disarming than thinking you've got some holy Joe in front of you. But I failed at doing this. So I went to the barn in Bardney, which I'm sure all of you have been, and I found my spiritual home. I love it at the barn. It was just the thing I noticed about the barn is that it's always church. Whether you're sat around a dinner table, whether you're sat in the prayer room or you're sat in the lounge, everybody's talking about God and Jesus. It's amazing. There's no order of service, but what else is there to talk about? And I failed at making that a possibility in Dorset. I'd set up all these boats and we got all these little groups working, but for some reason it was still fully reliant on me. It was still when I said, what's God doing in your lives, that tumbleweed would come flying through the room as everybody just went quiet and unable to express who God is or what He's doing. So what I wanted to create, I had no way of teaching, which is God is speaking everywhere all the time, but for some reason people weren't picking up on that. And then I came across a poem, and this poem is by the wonderful Mary Oliver. And in the middle of this poem, called Enough, she says this: instructions for living a life. Pay attention. Be astonished. Tell about it. So in each of my boats, I went round and I told them this poem. And I said, our job is to notice things. But when we notice things, it's to ask God, why have we noticed them? And what are you going to say through them? And that ends up with us astonished. And then our job is to come ready to our boats to tell each other about all God is saying and doing, and also to tell the communities that we serve. So just a few ways that I've noticed God recently. If we could click on to the next slide. Thank you very much. This is an old picture where I was on the slide with my swing with my 4 children. And as we were going backwards and forwards, I noticed the rhythm. And I asked God, why am I noticing for the first time that I'm going backwards and forwards? And God said, because I want you to learn that this is what prayer is. The further back into the love of God you go, the more able you're to join in with what God's doing in the community. So I was astonished as God taught me that prayer isn't about being rescued and isn't for my benefit. Prayer is simply for me to go further into the intimacy of God so that I can join in with him, what he's doing in the world. So I tell everybody about the swing. Kath's heard the sermon about 150 times. And the last time I spoke about it at a CMS course, someone drew that picture. Swing back into God and then join him in all that he's doing in the world. Next slide. What else have we been noticing? Yeah, not only do I notice that when I'm with my kids, I notice when they chase me and I stay out of their reach. And then finally, when they've nearly had enough, I turn around and they run into my arms. And I noticed that. And then I realized that that's actually something to be astonished by, because it's when we run after God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength that he turns around and greets us as the Father. And then I noticed that my kids are copying me. It's really embarrassing that I'm turning into my parents as well. I went through a red light the other day and my wife said, "You're driving like your father." And I was like, oh no, that's the worst thing she's ever said to me. But my kids are just like me and it's scary. And I noticed it and I asked God, what are you saying in that? And he said, are you taking after me? Just by hanging around me, are you imitating me? Are you picking up that family likeness as well as the one that's in your DNA and genes? Next slide. Then I came across this film. This is My Big Fat Greek Wedding. And it came out in the cinema, the third one. And I thought, oh, I better watch the first one. So I watched the first one. I'm usually about 20 years behind in films. And I was watching this, and my word, if you ever want to watch a film about mission, watch this, and about how different the world is to us. And basically, the film's about this American, the chap, and this Greek woman, and they fall in love. But because he's not Greek, it's a problem. So he has to go through all these crazy Greek initiations to be accepted by this crazy Greek family. And at one point, she turns to him, and I noticed this. She said, "Why are you doing this?" And he said, "Because I came alive when I met you." And I noticed it, and I prayed about it, and I was astonished by it, because God gave me the line, which I can always say to people when they say, "Why are you doing boats and harbors? Why are you a minister? Why have you given up on everything and living by faith?" Because I came alive when I met Jesus. Because what was black and white became color. Next one. Watching Newsnight. We're in a hopeless time, aren't we, at the moment? There's wars everywhere, there's breaking everywhere. And they showed some paintings that were going to give us and lift our spirits. This picture's called Hope. And it's the most hopeless picture you could ever meet, because there's a woman absolutely collapsed forlorn on the world, playing a harp blindfolded with one broken string. There's no hope whatsoever, apart from, and you can't see it in this picture, the sunlight shines through the harp. There's a little bit of hope. And that hope is that Jesus is coming again. And however broken the people I serve in my community are, and my word, they're broken, I can say to them, if you feel like a woman blindfolded, playing the harp with one broken string, the light is shining. There is a chance, there is a hope, and that hope is Jesus Christ. Next page. I used to have a car called the Pope-mobile. It was an old banger of a car. It was given to me by my nan, Ez's nan, and it was an awful car. And we also got bought a lovely, quite new Volkswagen Touran. And we had a period of people breaking into cars and taking what they could. And one morning we woke up and the VW Touran, the doors were still open, all of the little, what do you call them? The little boxes that you all have, I can't think of the word, but they had all been opened and any spare change that had been taken had been stolen. And they would have gone away empty-handed because my wife drives that car and she brings in and tidies up and does all of that. They didn't even attempt the Pope-mobile. And if they had, they'd have found a stereo and loads of cash and my mobile phone and my wallet because it's my car. And I don't tidy up or clean up after myself. And I realized that I noticed that. And I asked God, why am I noticing that? And he said, that's the church. It seems unfashionable. It seems like it's no longer relevant. It looks like something that only 2% of the country are interested in. But that's where the treasure is. The treasure is in the 2% who are living radical communities and are loving each other in such a way, but it shines like stars to the generation around us. You have a treasure. The boats and harbors are a treasure to the world around us. Do you believe that? Well done, Sarah. I knew you would. Next slide. Boats and harbors, rewilding the church. All things that we've noticed on our journey, Adam, Pete, Kath, I, Sarah, and all of you. And God, we noticed them. We're astonished by them because God's teaching us through each and every one of these. And we tell one another, don't we? This has transformed the lives of the boats that we've had in Dorset. And once I spoke on all of this, suddenly people came ready to say what they had noticed and how they were astonished. I look after a boats and harbours in Parkstone Pool, and I started there a year and a half ago, and it was 30 old dears. And they sat in this massive amphitheatre of a Baptist church, and they had worked out how far apart they could sit. I'm sure they measured it, and they'd worked out that if they sit 3.2 meters away from each other, that's how they do it. And they all waited for me to come and entertain them and preach and speak and lead worship. I spoke on this, and it's no word of a lie to say the week after, I didn't get a chance to preach because everybody was babbling over each other about what they had noticed, what God was saying, and what had astonished them. I thought I'd sorted it, you know. Boats and Harbours was rocking. Finally, it didn't rely on me to come and bring the message. Everybody was coming, ready to bless, ready to bring. My work here is done. And then God reminded me of the next page. He gave me a picture of a dog on its back, on all fours, completely surrendered, showing every bit of itself, and said that I love the fact that everybody's praying on the go. I love the fact that they're noticing all the burning bushes, but I also want intimacy with them. I want to be one with them. I want them to come fully surrendered. And when I say them, I really mean me, because the way I teach is that God speaks to me and I try it. And when I tell everybody what I'm trying to do on my journey, and everybody starts to join in. Mark chapter 1, Ben's version. Yeah, I love taking naps on boats. So, Mark chapter 1, this is my own version, so you might want to make sure I'm not being too dodgy. But we have a day in the life of Jesus. I think it's probably the only day in the life of Jesus we have outside of Holy Week. And it's there that we see Jesus go and preach and teach in the morning, something like what I'm doing, but probably a little bit better. And as you look around the eyes of those listening to Jesus, we know that they're all amazed. Their eyes are big. They're focusing on every word. This man is teaching like they've never heard teaching before. This is transforming society, making it upside down. And it's brilliant. And as you look among the eyes, there's one pair of eyes that are different. And those eyes are sad and broken. Those eyes are disturbed. Those eyes are just not where the others are. And Jesus always notices the one. And when this man cries out, Jesus goes over and heals him and casts out demons. And this man is completely healed. Jesus isn't really congratulated for that, but instead accused. That was the morning. In the afternoon, they go back to Peter's mother-in-law's house. And they go back there with the disciples to spend time discipling one another and to spend time hanging around with Jesus. There's a problem when they get back, and this isn't a sermon for the feminists, but they haven't got anyone to make the tea, so they heal Peter's mother-in-law, and she immediately goes downstairs and cooks and cleans for him. Forgive me, it's in the Bible. My wife's a minister. It's okay. And she gives them a meal, and they talk and they spend time together. Now, I don't know about you, but preaching in the morning, spending all afternoon with a load of, let's be honest, quite difficult disciples, you'd be pretty shattered. And then after tea time, as it gets dark, there's a knock on the door. Well, it's probably not a knock because they're probably in the door. But anyway, they make themselves present at the door, and Jesus goes out with his disciples, and the whole village and towns are there. All the people who are sick and ill, everybody who's demon possessed. And it tells us that Jesus went around every single one and healed them and touched them. What it doesn't tell us is what time he went to bed, but it does tell us what time he got up. Very early in the morning, Jesus got up and went along to the countryside and the mountains to spend time on his own, being intimate with his God, like a dog on all fours. If you want a more biblical analogy than the dog on all fours, think of the Lord's my shepherd, and think of the lamb, and think of the rod going over the lamb's head, and the shepherd touching every part of the lamb to see what needs fixing, what needs healing, where there's any scars, what needs sewing. That's the image I'm going for. Just happened that God gave me dog on all fours. We know that this was Jesus' pattern, not because only when the disciples came to find him, they said, "What are you doing, Jesus?" And he said, "Oh, come on, let's go to the next village and let's do that 24 hours again." And then the next village and the next village. But in Holy Week, when Jesus goes to Gethsemane, it says to us, he went there as was his custom. It tells us that Judas knew where Jesus would be because he was always at Gethsemane praying to the Father. So where's your Gethsemane? Where is it you encounter Jesus? Where is it you're transformed from inside out? Where is it you surrender? And do you spend enough time there that people will know where you are? I know where Mr. Leach will be. He'll be down his allotment praying to Jesus. I know where Ben will be. He'll be walking around the river praying to Jesus. No, I know where Ben will be. He'll be picking up his kids from 15 different clubs, visiting about 150 people that are sick. But no, where is our Gethsemane? Where is our place that we encounter God? Because to imitate Jesus means to have an intimacy with the Father so that we can say with Jesus, we only do that we see our Father doing. Next slide, please. The problem with the dog is that not many of us want to surrender, do we? And if I was to go back to my issues in my spiritual life, it's the failure to fully surrender. Am I on my own there? So it's just me and Lids. It's all right, Lids. We'll have a little self-help group next with your chili. Yeah. It's just now on fire. The problem is that we have warped mirrors, don't we? Hence the picture. We don't see ourselves as we really are. And we think that God's going to see us like we're not really. I was in a very charismatic church in Bristol one night, and they had the Bethel over from America. And these people were on the stage and they were picking, I'm not going to do this before any of you twitch, but they picked people out in the congregation and said, "I've got a word for aid," and give the word, and this person would say whether it was right or not. And I remember saying, "I hope they don't pick me out." But if it's God speaking, why was I afraid? Because I was worried that God was going to tell everybody what I think about myself. But it's, I'm weak, I'm a failure, I'm fat, I'm overweight, I'm lazy, I'm tired, I'm a rubbish parent. But of course, God's the only one who does see us how we are, and God sees each one of us. And do you know what he sees? Jesus, because he died for us, for our sins, so that God will no longer see our sin, but only see righteousness. So God, please speak to me, because I'm going to hear what I'm really like. But I'm the apple of your eye and I'm the beloved. But we've got warped mirrors, haven't we? We think God's going to see us as we really are. But my words, we don't know who we are. because we look in the mirror and we see what we're not. We compare our gifts with others who've got them better. And we compare the things that we're best at. We don't bother comparing because they're worthless. Each one of you is so special. Your mirrors are warped, but God sees you as you really are. Surrender, and he will tell you. And the things that he needs to sow and correct, he does in such a gentle, beautiful, loving way. And it's always for good. Next one, please. But it's difficult to surrender because we have a society that tells us we must be certain things. And actually, we don't know who we are anymore to surrender because am I Ben the father, Ben the husband, Ben the son, Ben in Dorset Harbours, Ben in Parkstone, Ben in Stowborough, Ben in Chalton Down, Ben in Threshold, what the flip's the arrow team? And we can't get to God because we've got so much going on, haven't we? And then we look at Charles and we look at every royal person who's gone before, taken off all regalia, all crowns, all titles, to just sit on his knees and say, here I am, Charles, your son, anoint me. Our job is to get rid of all those titles that have mean nothing really, because God's asking us to come just as Ben, just as your name, to come. God doesn't want you in your roles, though he will be with you in that. He wants you. He wants your very being. The amount of time I say to people of a certain age who are going through a difficult time, have you been praying for yourself? And they say, no. I've been praying for them, no. Or they've got it worse. How can I pray for myself and what's going on in Gaza? All of those sort of things. We think that we're praying is selfish, but it's inward looking. And of course, we're called to be outward looking. But of course, prayer isn't about that. Prayer is about being transformed into the likeness of Jesus, the swing, going back into God so that we can join him. When we pray, it isn't for our benefit, though it is. It's for the benefit of the world, because it's only then that we can shine. It's only then that we can share the good news. And it's only then that we get asked to witness to Jesus. My wife and I have very different love languages. And mine is to bring gifts. I love making good gifts. My wife likes doing stuff, which I don't notice, which doesn't go down well. One Valentine's Day, I bought her a bench with a plaque on it from our favourite film, Notting Hill, which said, to heirs who sits in this garden, from Ben who sits beside her. Yeah, it's lovely, isn't it? The problem was that none of the people who do plaques have ever done one for someone who's still alive. So actually the plaque said, to heirs who sat in this garden. So we have two stories in the Bible that come one after the other, and they're about love languages. It comes after the question, how do we love God with heart, mind, soul, and strength? And how do we love neighbor? And God tells the story of the Good Samaritan on how we should love neighbor with incredible sacrificial generosity and love. But then it tells the story of Mary and Martha, which answers the question, how do we love God with heart, mind, soul, and strength? And we got Martha, Martha. The reason I didn't call my child Martha was I have to say it twice. Martha, Martha, who's running around like a loon, making the house brilliant and cooking up a storm, showing her love language. And then we got Mary showing her love language of intimacy. And Martha says, get my good for nothing sister to help me for flip's sake. That's an exact translation. And Jesus reveals his and God's love language. Martha, Martha, come and be with me. Our God's love language is when we come like that. It's when we just come fully open to him, fully surrendered, wanting intimacy. When we hang around with God, next page, when we hang around with our dogs, we become like them. Keep flicking through. Keep going. When we hang around with our dogs, we become like them, apparently. When we hang out with our God, we become like him. He invites us to be intimate with him so that we can remember that he is with us every step of every day in every working place that we go. And that, my friends, is missional, because we live in a place where the world is anxious and alone and fragmented. As we hang out with Jesus, we start to get the family likeness and what we call the fruit of the Spirit. And we start to be kinder and more loving and more generous and more patient. That, my friends, is missional, because the world needs some of that loving and patience and kindness, doesn't it? But not only that, when we hang out with Jesus, we get the gifts of the Spirit. Some of them a bit crazy, some of them very normal, but each one given to us to join in the mission of God and bring shalom to those who need it the most. My friends, you can be chili peppers. You can transform the entire of Lincolnshire, because God's called each one of you. If you're broken and you ain't got it and you're not clever enough or holy enough, you're just the people that God's looking for. Notice God in everything, because he's shouting in burning bushes in every moment of the day. Notice things and then pray, why am I noticing them? And allow God to astonish you, and then please tell people. But also, would you come to God as often as you can to your Gethsemane place, on your back, legs in the air, trying to be one, fully surrendered, because it's there that you'll be transformed, and it's there that you'll become agents of transformation. In Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen.